Commander Marcus Cole opened his eyes and saw nothing but light at first. Then the world came into focus, and he found himself inside a cell, made of something that looked like glass, but felt alive when he touched it. His head was pounding, and his memories came back slowly, like water dripping through cracks in a wall. He remembered the battle at Titan, humanity's last colony, where they had fought against the Velkari fleet for 11 long months, until the shields finally failed and the enemy ships broke through. He remembered the explosion that threw him across the deck of his ship, and then darkness took him. Now he was here, wherever here was, and he was alone. The cell hummed with a soft blue glow, and Marcus pushed himself to his feet and examined his prison with the eyes of a soldier, looking for any weakness he could use. There was none that he could see. A sound made him turn, and he watched as a section of the wall simply melted away, to reveal 2 tall creatures standing in the opening. They were Velkari, the enemy that had conquered 1,000 worlds across the galaxy before they came for Earth. They stood nearly 8 feet tall, with bodies covered in hard shells that shimmered like oil on water, and their faces were somewhere between an insect and something from a nightmare, with large eyes that reflected light like broken purple gems. One of them spoke in a clicking language, and a moment later, Marcus heard the translation through a small device attached to his collar. "You will come with us, human, for the Supreme Queen wishes to see you." Marcus did not move at first, and the Velkari guard tilted its head like it was confused by his hesitation. "Why does your queen want to see me?" Marcus asked. "You are a curiosity," the guard answered. "A tribute from the war, and the queen collects interesting things." Marcus felt anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down, because anger, without a plan, was just noise. He walked forward, and let them lead him through hallways that curved and twisted in ways that made no sense to human eyes. The ship was massive, larger than any human vessel ever built, and everywhere Marcus looked, he saw Velkari of different sizes going about their work. Some were small, and moved quickly with their heads down, and Marcus guessed these were workers or servants of some kind. Others were larger, and carried weapons, and they watched him pass with eyes that held no warmth. Finally, they reached a massive door that opened into a throne room so large that Marcus could not see the ceiling above. The floor was black like polished obsidian, and the walls were covered with what looked like living crystal that pulsed with soft light. And there, at the far end of the room, sat the queen, on a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself. Queen Thesania was unlike anything Marcus had expected, even by Velkari standards, and her body was covered in chitin that gleamed like dark silver under the lights. Her eyes were larger than those of her guards, and they held something that almost looked like curiosity as she watched Marcus approach. She was terrifying and beautiful in a way that Marcus could not explain, like a storm, or a predator, or something ancient that had existed long before his species crawled out of the ocean. The guards forced Marcus to his knees before the throne, and Thesania rose and walked down the steps toward him, with movements that were smooth and graceful. She circled him slowly, and Marcus felt like prey being examined by something that had not yet decided if it was hungry. "So, this is a human," she said, and her voice was deeper than he expected, rich and cold, like wind through a canyon. 11 months, she continued. "My fleet was delayed for 11 months by your species, and my advisors told me that humans were primitive, and weak, and would fall in days." She stopped in front of him, and tilted her head. "They were wrong, it seems, and I do not like being given wrong information." Marcus looked up at her and met her eyes, even though every instinct told him to look away. "Maybe your advisors should get out more," he said. The guards beside him hissed in anger, but Thesania raised one clawed hand, and they went silent. "You speak boldly for a prisoner," she said. "I speak honestly," Marcus replied, and if you wanted someone who would cower and beg, then you picked the wrong human. Thasanya studied him for a long moment, and something flickered in her eyes that Marcus could not read. "Tell me something, human," she said. "Your ships were outnumbered 100 to 1, and your colony had no hope of survival. Yet your people fought until the very end, and many of my warriors died, taking what should have been an easy victory." She leaned closer, and her voice dropped to something almost like a whisper. "What makes your kind fight when mathematics says you cannot win?" Marcus thought about the question, and he thought about Earth and humanity, and all the times his species had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. "Because we are too stubborn to do the math," he answered. Thasanya pulled back and stared at him, and for a moment the throne room was completely silent. Then she made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else entirely. "Stubborn," she repeated. "Yes, I think that word fits your species well." She turned and walked back toward her throne, and spoke without looking at him. "You will not be executed today, human, for I find you interesting, and I wish to understand this stubbornness that cost me so many ships." She sat on her throne, and waved one hand toward the guards. "He will serve in my personal retinue, where I can observe him, and perhaps he will teach me something useful about his kind before he dies." Marcus was pulled to his feet and led away, and he felt Dasanya's eyes on his back until the doors closed behind him. He did not know what the future held, or how long he would survive in this alien place, but he knew one thing for certain: he was not going to break. They put him in a small room near the servants' quarters, and gave him simple clothes, and told him his duties would begin the next day. Marcus lay on the thin bed and stared at the ceiling, and thought about home, and wondered if anyone from his crew had survived. Outside his door he could hear the clicking sounds of Velkari moving through the halls, and somewhere far away the ship's engines hummed with power. He was a prisoner on an alien vessel, surrounded by enemies who saw him as nothing more than an interesting pet. But he was alive, and as long as he was alive, there was hope. That was the human way, was what the Velkari would never understand until it was too late. Marcus closed his eyes and let sleep take him, because tomorrow would bring new challenges, and he needed to be ready. The Queen wanted to study human stubbornness. He would give her a lesson she would never forget. 3 weeks passed aboard the Throne of Silence, and Marcus learned to survive in his strange new world. The other servants avoided him at first, because he was alien and strange, and they did not know what to make of a creature that walked on 2 legs and had soft skin instead of hard shell. But Marcus was patient, and he watched and he learned. He learned the Velkari language slowly, picking up words and phrases until he could speak without the translation device around his neck. He learned the names of the workers who cleaned the halls and prepared the food and maintained the ship's systems. They were the lowest caste in Velkari society, treated as tools rather than beings, and no one of higher rank ever bothered to learn their names or speak to them with kindness. Marcus was different. He thanked them when they helped him, and he asked about their lives, and he remembered every name they told him. At first, they were confused by this strange behavior, but slowly they began to trust him and even seek him out when they had a few moments of rest. "Why do you speak to us?" a small worker named Keth asked him one day. "We are nothing, just workers, and you are a commander among your people." "Where I come from," Marcus said, "every person matters, not just the ones with power." Keth made a clicking sound that Marcus had learned meant surprise and wonder. "Your world sounds very strange," Keth said. "It was beautiful," Marcus replied, and his voice was soft with memory, "and maybe someday you will see it." Queen Thasanya summoned Marcus to her chambers often during those weeks, and their conversations grew longer each time. She asked him about human history and human culture and human ways of thinking. Marcus told her about Earth, about the blue oceans that covered most of the planet, and the green forests that had once stretched across the land. He told her about music and art, stories that humans passed down from generation to generation. He told her about laughter and tears, and the way humans held hands just because they wanted to feel connected to another person. Thasanya listened to all of this with an expression that Marcus could not read. "We do not have these things," she said one evening as they stood in her private garden, a massive room filled with plants that glowed in the darkness. "Valkyrie do not dream, and we do not make music, and we do not touch each other unless it serves a purpose." "That sounds lonely," Marcus said. Thasanya turned to look at him, and her purple eyes reflected the soft light of the glowing flowers. "I did not know it was lonely," she said, "until you told me about something different." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something that neither of them had words for yet. Then an alarm shattered the moment, and red light flooded the garden, and a voice announced that there was an emergency in the lower decks. Thasanya moved quickly, and Marcus followed her to the command center, where officers were shouting reports in rapid Valkyrie. A parasitic infection had broken out in the worker quarters, spreading fast and killing anyone it touched within hours. Marcus watched the tactical display and saw that thousands of workers were trapped in the infected sections. "What is the protocol?" Thasanya asked. "We seal the sections and vent them to space," her chief advisor answered. "It is the only way to stop the spread." "You mean you kill everyone inside?" Marcus said. The advisor turned to look at him with cold eyes. "They are workers," the advisor said. "They can be replaced." "They are people," Marcus shouted. "They have names and lives, and they trusted me when I told them that beings with power could also have hearts." Thasanya raised her hand for silence and looked at Marcus with something strange in her expression. "Do you have another solution, human?" Marcus thought fast and remembered his training and everything he knew about biology and medicine. "Human immune systems are different from Valkyrie," he said. "There is a chance that my body produces something that could slow the parasite down long enough to find a cure." "You would go into the infected zone?" Thasanya asked. "Yes. You would likely die." "Maybe," Marcus said, "but I would rather die trying to save them than live knowing I let them burn." The command center went silent, and every Valkyrie stared at Marcus like he had grown a second head. Thasanya studied him for a long moment, and then she nodded. "Let him go," she said. Marcus entered the quarantine zone with nothing but a medical kit and samples of his own blood. The infected sections were chaos, with sick workers lying in the halls, and healthy ones trying to care for them with no supplies and no hope. Marcus found Keth among the survivors, and together they organized the healthy workers into teams. For 3 days, Marcus worked without sleep, testing his theory and mixing compounds and injecting anyone who was still alive with his experimental treatment. It was rough and dangerous, and he did not know if it would work. But on the 3rd day, the dying stopped. The infection slowed and then halted, and the workers who had been given the treatment began to recover. When Marcus finally walked out of the quarantine zone, he could barely stand, and his body was covered in sweat and grime. But behind him came 2,000 workers who should have been dead. They bowed to him as he passed, pressing their heads to the floor in a gesture of respect that Marcus had never seen them give to anyone. Queen Thasanya was waiting for him at the quarantine barrier. She stared at him with eyes that held something new, something that looked almost like awe. "You saved them," she said. "I just did what any human would do," Marcus replied. "No," Thasanya said softly. "No human or Valkyrie that I have ever known would do what you did." She reached out and touched his face with one clawed hand, so gently that Marcus barely felt it. "You are an impossible creature, Marcus Cole," she whispered, "and I do not know what to do with you." Marcus looked into her eyes and saw something there that he had not expected to see. He saw fear. Not fear of him, but fear of what he made her feel. And in that moment he realized that he felt something too, something that terrified him just as much. He was falling in love with an alien queen. And that was either the most human thing he had ever done, or the most foolish. Probably both. News of what Marcus had done spread through the fleet like fire through dry grass. The workers whispered his name in the corridors, and spoke of the human who had walked into death to save them, when their own rulers would have let them burn. But not everyone was pleased by this development. Queen Vorath commanded the traditionalist faction of the Valkyrie Empire, and she had ruled for 300 years before Thesania was even born. She was old and cunning and cruel, and she saw Thesania's mercy toward the human as a sign of weakness that could be exploited. Vorath sent messages to the High Synod, the Council of Queens that governed the empire, demanding that Marcus be executed publicly to restore the dignity of Valkyrie rule. "A human cannot be allowed to become a hero to our workers," Vorath argued. "It gives them ideas above their station and threatens the order that has held our empire together for millennia." The Synod was divided. Debates raged through the communication channels, while Thesania fought to protect her strange human prisoner. Meanwhile, Marcus and Thesania continued to meet in secret, stealing moments in her glowing garden when the rest of the ship was asleep. She showed him the flowers that her mother had planted before she died, the only living things Thesania had ever cared for before Marcus arrived. He taught her human games and human songs, and once he even tried to teach her to dance, which ended with both of them stumbling and making sounds that might have been laughter. "I was never given a choice," Thesania told him one night as they sat among the luminescent blooms. "I was engineered in a laboratory to be a queen, raised in isolation and trained to command, and no one ever asked me what I wanted." "What did you want?" Marcus asked. Thesania was quiet for a long time. "I did not know," she finally said. "I did not know that wanting was something I could do until I met you." She turned to face him, and her eyes glowed softly in the darkness. "You are the first creature to ever see me," she said, "instead of my throne." Marcus reached out and took her clawed hand in his, feeling the hard ridges of her chitin against his soft human skin. "I see you," he said, "and what I see is beautiful." Something changed in Thesania's expression, something that was vulnerable and afraid and hopeful all at once. They sat together in silence and watched the flowers drift on currents of artificial wind, and neither of them spoke about what was growing between them, because some things were too fragile for words. But Queen Vorath was watching. She had spies everywhere, and they told her about the secret meetings, and the soft looks, and the way Thesania's voice changed when she spoke about the human. Vorath smiled when she heard these reports, because she had found the weapon she needed. Assassination attempt came 3 days later. Thesania was walking through the lower decks, something she had started doing since Marcus showed her that her workers had names and faces, when an explosion ripped through the corridor. She survived because her guards threw themselves in front of the blast, but she was injured, and her ship was thrown into chaos. Within hours, Vorath appeared before the Synod, with evidence that human saboteurs had planted the bomb. The evidence was perfect, too perfect, with communication logs and weapon signatures that pointed directly to human resistance fighters hiding among the fleet. "The human prisoner must have been coordinating with them," Vorath declared. "This is what happens when we show mercy to inferior species." The Synod voted, and the result was exactly what Vorath wanted. Marcus was to be executed at dawn, and the Valkyrie fleet would resume its mission to exterminate every last human survivor. Guards came for Marcus in the middle of the night and dragged him to a cell deep in the heart of the ship, where no light reached. He sat in the darkness and thought about home, and wondered if this was how it would end, alone in an alien prison with no one to remember his name. Then he heard the door open, and soft footsteps approached his cell. It was Thesanya. She had bandages on her arms, and her movements were slow and careful, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "I know you did not do this," she said. "I know you know," Marcus replied, "but knowing will not save me." Thesanya pressed her hand against the barrier between them. "I could save you," she said. "I could defy the Synod and refuse to hand you over." "And then what?" Marcus asked. "Civil war among your people? Thousands dead because of one human?" "You are not just one human," Thesanya said, and her voice cracked with emotion. "Not to me." Marcus stood and walked to the barrier and placed his hand against hers with only the thin energy field between them. "Listen to me," he said. "I am going to die tomorrow, and there is nothing either of us can do to change that. But you can still change everything else." "I do not want to rule an empire without you," Thesanya whispered. "Then make it an empire worth ruling," Marcus said. "Change the laws, and free the workers, and show your people that there is another way to live. Do it for me, do it for everyone who was told they did not matter." Thesanya made a sound that was almost like crying, though Marcus did not know if Valkyrie could cry. "I was not supposed to feel this way," she said. "Queens do not love, it is not in our nature." "Maybe nature is wrong," Marcus said. "Maybe you are more than what they made you to be." They stood there in the darkness with their hands pressed together, and time seemed to stop around them. "I do not want to say goodbye," Thesanya said. "Then do not say it," Marcus replied. "Just remember me, and let that be enough." Thesanya pulled back and looked at him one last time, and then she turned and walked away. Marcus watched her go and felt his heart break in ways he did not know were possible. He had fallen in love with an alien queen, and now he was going to die. But at least he had shown her something worth living for. At least he had changed one heart in a heartless universe. That would have to be enough. He closed his eyes and waited for dawn. Dawn came to the great arena of the flagship, where executions were held before crowds of thousands. Marcus was brought out in chains and forced to his knees on a platform of cold black stone, while Valkyrie of every caste gathered to watch. Queen Vorath stood on the royal balcony with a smile of triumph on her face, and her guards flanked her like shadows. The executioner stepped forward with a blade that hummed with deadly energy, and the crowd fell silent. Then a voice rang out across the arena, strong and clear and full of fire. "I invoke the right of truth." Every head turned to see Queen Thesanya striding through the main entrance with her wounded arm held stiff at her side, and her eyes blazing like stars. Whispers erupted through the crowd, because the right of truth had not been spoken in over 3,000 years. It was an ancient law from the earliest days of the Empire that allowed any Valkyrie to challenge another through combat, if they believed a lie had been spoken before the Synod. "I accuse Queen Vorath of treason," Thesanya declared. "I accuse her of ordering the assassination attempt that wounded me and killed my guards. I accuse her of falsifying evidence to frame the human prisoner, and I accuse her of plotting to steal my throne." The arena exploded with noise, and Vorath's face twisted with rage. "You have no proof," Vorath snarled. "I do not need proof," Thesanya replied. "I have the right, and by ancient law you must face me in combat, or confess your guilt before all." The Synod members who were present looked at each other in shock, but none could deny the law. Vorath was trapped. If she refused to fight, then she admitted everything, but if she fought and lost, then her faction would crumble and her power would be broken. Slowly Vorath smiled and stepped down from the balcony. "Very well, child," she said. "I accept your challenge. And when I kill you, I will take your throne and your fleet, and I will personally execute your pet human while his blood is still warm." The two queens faced each other in the center of the arena, and attendants brought them their weapons, long, curved blades that gleamed in the harsh light. Marcus watched from his platform with his heart pounding and his chains cutting into his wrists. The signal was given, and the battle began. Vorath was old, but she was cunning, and her blade moved with centuries of experience behind every strike. Thesania was young and fast, but she was wounded, and her movements were slowed by pain. They clashed again and again, and the sound of their blades rang through the arena like thunder. Blood splattered the stone floor, and Marcus could not tell whose it was. Vorath pressed her advantage, and drove Thesania back toward the edge of the platform, where a fall would mean certain death. "You were always weak," Vorath hissed as she struck. "Too soft, too curious, too willing to see value in things beneath you." Thesania blocked the blow, but stumbled and fell to one knee. Vorath raised her blade for the killing stroke, and then Thesania remembered something Marcus had told her weeks ago during one of their long conversations. "Humans do not win because we are stronger," he had said. "We win because we get back up." Thesania caught Vorath's blade with her bare hand, feeling it cut deep into her palm, and used the moment of surprise to drive her own weapon through Vorath's chest. Vorath staggered backward with shock in her eyes. "How?" she gasped. "I learned from a human," Thesania said, "and humans are stubborn." Vorath fell and did not rise again. The arena was silent for one long moment, and then chaos erupted. Vorath's loyalist forces refused to accept defeat, and they activated a contingency plan that had been set in motion days ago. The remnants of Earth's colonies began moving to bombard the human survivors in retaliation. Thesania shouted orders, and her ships moved to intercept. But there were too many loyalists, and the human colonies were too far away. Marcus was freed from his chains during the confusion, and he ran to the command deck with Thesania at his side. "We cannot stop them in time," one of her officers reported. "The loyalist fleet will reach the human settlements in minutes." Marcus looked at the tactical display and saw the tiny dots that represented the last of his people, the survivors who had hidden in caves and bunkers while the war raged above them. He could not let them die. "Give me access to the communication array," he said. Thesania nodded, and her officers obeyed. Marcus opened a channel that broadcast to every ship in both fleets, Velkari and human alike, and he began to speak. "My name is Commander Marcus Cole of the United Earth Remnant," he said, "and I am speaking to everyone who can hear my voice." He paused and gathered his thoughts. "I know we are enemies. I know we have killed each other by the thousands, and I know there is anger and hatred between our peoples that may never fully heal. But I have seen something these past weeks that gives me hope. I have seen a Velkari queen who chose mercy when her laws demanded death. I have seen workers who were treated as nothing discover that they had worth, and I have seen two species find common ground in the most impossible place. The war is over. Vorath is dead, and her lies have been exposed, and now we have a choice. We can continue killing until there is nothing left, or we can try something new, something terrifying and strange and beautiful. We can try peace." Thesania stepped forward, and her voice joined hands on the broadcast. "I am Queen Thesania of the Velkari Empire, and I confirm what this human has said. The war ends today. Any ship that fires on the human colonies will be considered an enemy of my throne. I have seen a better universe in the eyes of this human," she continued, "and I will not let fear extinguish it." The loyalist fleet slowed and stopped. The weapons that had been armed went silent, and across the void of space, two species that had been locked in war held their breath and waited. One by one the loyalist ships stood down, The war was over, not with conquest or destruction, but with a choice. Marcus felt Thesania's hand find his, and he held on tight. They had done the impossible. Now came the hard part, building something that would last. 6 months had passed since the war ended, and the galaxy was slowly learning how to breathe again. The Treaty of Two Worlds was signed on a space station that floated between Earth's sun and the nearest Valkyrie outpost. Neutral ground, where representatives of both species met as equals for the first time in history. It was not a perfect treaty, because perfect things did not exist, but it was a beginning, and sometimes a beginning was all you needed. Queen Thesania ruled a changed empire now. The old laws that had treated workers as property were being rewritten, and the caste system that had held for millennia was cracking at its foundations. Not everyone was happy about these changes, and there were protests and resistance and whispered plots in dark corners. But the workers remembered Marcus Cole. They remembered the human who had walked into death to save them, and they remembered the queen who had listened when no one else would. Slow, but it was real, and every day brought new possibilities that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Marcus served as Earth's first ambassador to the Valkyrie Empire. He had refused the title of admiral that the human government wanted to give him, because he said he was tired of war, and wanted to build something instead of destroy. So he put on diplomatic robes instead of military uniforms, and he walked the halls of the Throne of Silence as a guest instead of a prisoner. The Valkyrie still stared at him when he passed, but the stares were different now, curious instead of hostile, wondering instead of contemptuous. The workers bowed their heads in respect, and sometimes the younger ones would stop him in the corridors to ask questions about Earth and humanity, and all the strange, wonderful things they had heard about. Marcus answered every question with patience and kindness, because that was who he was, and that was the example he wanted to set. Keth had been promoted to a position on Thesania's personal staff, the first worker in history to hold such a role. And sometimes Marcus and Keth would sit together in the observation lounge and watch the stars drift by. "Do you think it will last?" Keth asked one evening. "The peace, the changes, all of it?" Marcus thought about the question carefully. "I think it will last as long as we fight for it," he said. "Peace is not something you achieve once and then forget about. It is something you choose every single day." Keth made the clicking sound that meant understanding. "Humans are very wise," Keth said. "Humans are very stubborn," Marcus replied with a smile. "Sometimes that looks like wisdom." He and Thesania still met in her garden when the ship was quiet and the rest of the empire was asleep. They talked about politics and philosophy and the 1,000 small challenges that came with trying to change a civilization from the inside. But they also talked about nothing at all, sitting in comfortable silence among the glowing flowers, while the universe turned slowly around them. Their relationship was complicated, because how could it not be? She was a queen with the weight of an empire on her shoulders. He was a human ambassador, caught between two worlds. There were rules and protocols and expectations that said they should keep their distance. But the heart does not care about rules, and both of their hearts had made their choice long ago. One evening, Marcus found Thesania alone in the garden, sitting beneath the largest of the luminescent trees, with her crown removed and her eyes distant. She looked smaller without the trappings of royalty, quieter, and Marcus could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. He walked to her without speaking, and sat down beside her on the soft moss that covered the ground. "The council rejected my proposal again," Thesania said, without looking at him. "They say the reforms are too fast and the people are not ready." "What do you think?" Marcus asked. "I think they are afraid," she said, "and fear makes beings do foolish things." She finally turned to face him, and her purple eyes were bright with frustration and doubt. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing, she said. Sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough to see this through. Marcus reached out and took her hand, her clawed fingers wrapping around his soft human ones. Do you remember what you told me when we first met? He asked. You asked me why humans fight when we cannot win. And you said you were too stubborn to do the math, Thesania replied. Exactly, Marcus said. And now I'm asking you the same thing. Why do you fight for this when everyone tells you it is impossible? Thesania was quiet for a long moment. Because you showed me that impossible things can happen, she finally said. Because you walked into my life and turned everything I knew upside down and made me believe in something I never knew I wanted. She moved closer to him, and her voice dropped to something soft and vulnerable. You showed me that I could be more than what I was made to be. Marcus looked into her eyes and saw everything she was and everything she could become, and he felt his heart swell with something that had no name in any language. You are the bravest person I have ever known, he said. Velkari, or human, or anything else. And I am honored to stand beside you. Thesania reached up and touched his face with one gentle claw, tracing the line of his jaw with infinite care. I never believed in love, she said. My people do not have a word for it, because we were never supposed to feel it. She leaned forward until her face was close to his, and her breath was warm against his skin. But you taught me that words do not matter, she whispered. Only this. She pulled him into her arms and held him tight, and her voice was barely audible as she spoke the words that changed everything. I am yours, Earthling. Marcus wrapped his arms around her and felt her hearts beating against his chest, two rhythms that should never have found harmony, but somehow did. And I am yours, he said, stubborn math and all. Above them, the crystal dome of the garden showed a sky full of stars, the light of 1,000 worlds that had once been at war. Now, those worlds were learning to live together, learning to see each other as something more than enemies. It would not be easy, and it would not be perfect, but the best things never were. Thesania lifted her head and looked up at the stars, with wonder in her eyes. What do humans call this feeling? She asked. Marcus smiled and held her closer. We call it hope, he said. And somewhere out there among the stars, endless points of light, two civilizations were taking their first steps toward a future that neither had ever imagined. A future where the strong protected the weak instead of crushing them. A future where different species could find common ground across the void. A future where an alien queen and a human soldier could stand together and prove that love was stronger than war. It was a fragile thing, this new universe they were building. But fragile things could grow strong if you gave them enough care and stubborn enough hearts to believe in them. This was the human way. This was Thesania's way now too. And together they would show the galaxy what was possible when you chose hope over fear, when you chose love over hate, when you chose to get back up no matter how many times you fell. The stars burned bright above them, and the future stretched out like an endless road, and they would walk it. Together, always.